Now this is true. And in that moment, I realized I had no idea how to tell stories. I had no idea how to make movies. And the reason that I'd gotten as far as I'd gotten up to that point was you were telling an artificial kind of story. Short films, silent films. It was totally different language, totally different how you put the camera. And for whatever reason, stories where you expected people to be talking, which is the mistake most filmmakers make. They try to tell a normal story, but you can't hear anything. So it's super weird. And so that one sort of accidental decision convinced me that I was talented. And then, when the reality check of failing so publicly in front of my entire class, having to screen it in front of my family who'd flown down, it was heart-wrenching. And people were making fun of me, not even behind my back. They were making fun of me to my face. Film school in LA, boys and girls, certainly back then, was a brutal dog-eat-dog world. And when they smelled blood in the water, they went after me. And it was gut-wrenching. And I remember calling my mom from a payphone, laying on the ground in the middle of campus because I felt so broken. Everything about who I thought I was gone in an instant. And my mom just didn't know what to say. And so that began a period of my life where I felt utterly hopeless. Completely lost. And my parents stopped helping me financially when I graduated, so there I was. I did not have my 3-picture deal. I'm laying on the floor in the middle of campus. I can't afford rent. At one point, after graduating, I was laying on my carpet because I couldn't afford furniture. And I was just laying on the floor of my apartment saying, where do I go from here? I have no idea how to break into the film industry. I'm not a talented filmmaker anyway, so what does the rest of my life look like? And it felt so hopeless, and I was flirting with depression, and I had no idea how to get out of it. And then I lucked into a teaching job, and I started teaching filmmaking. And the fascinating thing was, I knew how to help the students get better. And so this notion that I had in my head that you're either born with something or you're not. You're either a born filmmaker or you're not. You're either a born entrepreneur or you're not, began to waver. And I began to think, wait a second, if I can help them make their films better, why can't I help myself make my own films better? And I went back into that mode that got me into film school, and I put my head down again, and I started working my ass off. And every night, to be able to go in and teach a class the next day, I worked and I studied and I tried to figure this stuff out and bring it in so I could teach them, to help them improve. And in doing that, I was reinforcing in my mind that I could change, that I could improve. And at that time, for those of you that remember this, the idea of brain plasticity was debated. People said you're born with a certain number of neurons and you just lose them over your life. Can't teach old dogs new tricks. There's no way to get better. And aging was this one-way road to nothingness, of becoming less of yourself day after day after day. And in that, I started to question that. Now today we have words for it. It's called a growth mindset. But Carol Dweck had not yet written her seminal book by that name. So I was stumbling my way through this, trying to figure out just how far I could push my talents. How far could I take this? Could I get really good? And then I meet this incredible woman. I fall for her in a way that I've never fallen for anybody in my life. She's from London, very successful father who took himself from living in a small village in Cyprus, which I'd never even heard of. I didn't have a passport at the time. Took himself from a small village in Cyprus, began living on his own at the age of 11, and worked his way up to running one of the largest shipping companies in the world. Took himself from abject poverty, the kind of poverty you can't imagine, where you can't afford meat, that your family eats meat once a year, from a goat, by the way, that you raise and slaughter. And took himself to being wealthy and very successful. Flash forward, I'm in love with this woman, and I go to this man, and I ask for his blessing to marry his daughter. And he says no. That was hard to hear. And he asks me one very simple question. Now, at this time, by the way, I don't have a job. I'm living at his ex-wife's house, my soon-to-be mother-in-law. His daughter is the breadwinner. She's going to work every day while I stay at home. And he asks me one question. My daughter has become used to a certain lifestyle. How do you plan to take care of her? And I said to him, sir, I know what you see right now is a broke kid with no job. But I'm telling you, I'm the most ambitious person you've ever met. But the truth was, while I had that dream, I knew what I wanted to become. I wasn't doing anything about it because I didn't understand the difference between ambition and drive. And at this period in my life, I would lay in bed for up to 3 or 4 hours every morning because it was warm under the sheets and it was cold out of them. And I didn't want to walk the 4 steps to grab my clothes, to put them on. I wasn't clever enough to think I'm going to take this sweatshirt and put it right next to the bed so I can warm up before I get out. That's 7 years before I'm a multimillionaire. And there I am, laying in bed, not having any idea how to solve the problem of being so cold I can't get myself out of bed. I can get better, but I've got to hold myself to a standard. I've got to work. I've got to figure out this thing called drive. I've got to get up and get going. I've got to become unstoppable. And I'm here to tell you right now, becoming unstoppable is a thing. It is very real and has everything to do with who you want to become and has nothing to do with who you are today. So I began to think about the person I wanted to become. I stopped worrying about who I was right now, and I began to paint a vision of how the person would act that I want to become. And I began to act in that fashion. Now, growing up, there were 2 things that I promised myself that would happen. Now, this is as a slightly chubby kid growing up in a morbidly obese family in Tacoma, Washington. Hey, Tacoma in the house. And I said, one day I'm going to be rich, and one day I'm going to have 6-pack abs. That was the promise. But I didn't know how I was going to achieve either of those things. My wife and I end up moving back from London to LA. I start teaching again. It's going well. It's reinforcing that belief that I can change. I can become what I want to become. I feel myself getting stronger. I'm reading a lot voraciously. I have this mathematical equation that I live by. I equals I-O. Ideas in equal ideas out. Don't worry about whether or not there are new thoughts to think. Worry only about that you have a unique mind based on your time, based on your experience, based on the things that you've read, and you will synthesize those ideas in a unique way. So I start reading voraciously, trying to get anything that I can into my mind. And as I'm doing this, as I'm realizing what it takes to actually grow and become different, 2 guys walk into my class, and they're wealthy entrepreneurs who also happen to be bodybuilders. So I'm like, you've got to be kidding. 6-pack abs and money. Like, this is nuts. And these guys say, hey, look, we're about to start a company. It's a technology company. Why don't you join us? We need a copywriter. But don't think of yourself as a copywriter. You can have any job in the company that you want. You just have to become the right person for the job. And I'm thinking, these guys are my white rabbit. They've got money. They've got 6-pack abs. I can learn a lot from them. So even though everybody thinks I'm crazy, to leave the job teaching, which is a stable job, to go with these guys who are probably BSing me and follow them into this startup. But I do it. And there's a whole bunch of us that they make that same statement to. You can have any job in the company you want. You just have to become the right person for that job. And when it started, we were in this beautiful conference room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Everyone had Florida glass or Florida ceiling windows, looking out at the Pacific Ocean, except for me. And I was put in the server room. If you've ever seen a server room, they are dark, they have whirring sound of all the computers processing everything. And I remember one of the guys asking me, who's the kid in the server room? And that's where I started. I started at the bottom. And one by one, I watched other people fall away. People that didn't want to work the amount of hours. They didn't want to put in the effort to get better. They weren't prepared to become somebody new. They were trying to capitalize on who they were. But by that point, I really believed I could become somebody else. And I remember saying to my wife, we're going to move, and we're going to get an apartment that's no more than 7 minutes from either of the two guys that hired me. They were the two partners in the company. And I said, the reason I want to do that is if they call me at 2 a.m. in the morning, I want to be able to get there in less than 10 minutes. And I want them to know no one is more serious about taking advantage of this opportunity than me. No one in this company is willing to work as hard as me. Not only will I be the only one that shows up, but I'll show up in less than 10 minutes.